Mr. Cameron Coyle, who's coming to speak to you now, holds an MA in Archaeology and Biblical Studies from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary and a BA from the University of Texas at Austin. He is ABD in a PhD program at Southwestern Baptist, where he's currently working on his dissertation examining issues of identity in Israel's northern Shephelah region during the transition from the Late Bronze Age to Iron Age 1. He's a senior staff member of the Tel Gezer Excavation Project, where he's worked in the field since 2008. He's also been involved with the field work and publication efforts of the Gezer Regional Survey Project.
I have titled this talk, Gezer in Solomon's Kingdom and Its Aftermath. What I would like to do is illustrate the intersection between the biblical text and the archaeological record in relationship to the ancient site of Gezer. Known today as Tel Gezer, this site was occupied for most of human history, and most relevant to our purposes this morning, it is an important city during the Late Bronze and Iron Ages. Now, we just heard an overview from Jared, but if you're still a little iffy on those terms, you can think of the Late Bronze Age as the high point of Canaanite society, and the final phase of which corresponds to Israel's emergence in the land. The first couple centuries of the subsequent Iron Age, traditionally known as the Iron Age 1, would correspond roughly to the Bible's period of the Judges, while the rise of the biblical United Monarchy marks the transition to Iron Age 2. Getting back to Tel Gezer, Jared and myself have just recently wrapped up a decade-long excavation project at Gezer, co-directed by Dr. Stephen Ortiz, who you heard from yesterday. Prior to our project, excavations at the site were sponsored by Hebrew Union College in the 1960s and 70s. And before the HUC team, the site was thoroughly turned over by R.A.S. McAllister of the Palestine Exploration Society. I say turned over because that's literally what he did. He excavated sequential trenches across the width of the site, using the dirt from each new trench to fill in the previous one. As you can probably imagine, that effort has somewhat complicated all subsequent work at the site and helped to gain the excavator the rather undesirable reputation reflected in the title of a recently published collection of papers, Villain or Visionary? R.A.S. McAllister in the Archaeology of Palestine. But despite this difficulty in working at the site, Tel Gezer has yielded a wealth of data that will be useful for our task this morning. I would like to begin, however, with the biblical data relating to the site, and once we have reviewed that data set, then we will take a look at the archaeology of Gezer. The biblical narrative makes some 14 references to the city of Gezer. We can divide these 14 references into 5 categories for classifying the information about the site and its history. Our first category relates to Joshua's conquest narrative. Here we find little information about the site of Gezer, and in fact, the site plays no role in the events narrated at all. Our second category of biblical data comes from the tribal allotment narratives. In Joshua chapter 16, we find that Gezer was included within the allotment of the people of Ephraim, a detail which is repeated in 1 Chronicles chapters 6 and 7. Moreover, we learn from this category of texts that the city of Gezer was one of the Ephraimite sites designated as a city of refuge and as a Levitical city. However, the extent to which this information reflects the historical realities of Israel's early history in the land is called into question by our third category of data, statements concerning Israel's inability to push the Canaanites out of Gezer. These statements, on the one hand, highlight the fact that the tribal allotment narratives include lands which were not entirely under Israelite control at the time, and on the other hand, lay the groundwork for our fourth category of biblical data, statements concerning Solomon's incorporation of Gezer into his kingdom. Our key text here comes from 1 Kings 9:15 through 17, wherein we are told that Solomon received the city of Gezer as a gift from an unnamed Egyptian pharaoh when he married the pharaoh's daughter. The narrator informs us that the pharaoh had gone up and captured Gezer and burned it with fire and had killed the Canaanites who lived in the city. Solomon then proceeded to rebuild the city using the same system of forced labor that he had drafted to build the house of the Lord and his own house and the Millo and the wall of Jerusalem and Chatzor and Megiddo. Preceding this fourth group from a historical perspective is our final category, comprised of statements relating to conflict with the Philistines. Here we find that 2 Samuel 5:25 and its parallel in 1 Chronicles 14:16 Both name Gezer as the furthest point to which David had pursued the Philistines following his battle with them in the valley of Rephaim. Gezer served as David's stopping point, most likely due to its status as a Canaanite city on the edge of Israelite territory. We need not read into these passages a biblical tradition of a Philistine Gezer, as has often been the case. The same reality likely lies behind our final passage in this category, 1 Chronicles 20, verse 4, which mentions war with the Philistines at Gezer. So, to summarize, the biblical narrative provides us with specific information relating to Gezer during the early years of the Israelite presence in the land. The city itself was not part of Joshua's southern campaign, though its king and men of war were defeated in battle at Lachish. The site was included within the Ephraimite territorial allotment and designated as a city of refuge and a Levitical city. But Israel failed to drive out the local Canaanites, and consequently, Gezer remained a Canaanite site on the border between Israelite and Philistine territory throughout the Iron Age I and the early Iron Age IIA. Looking beyond our 5 categories of information relating specifically to Gezer in the biblical text, we can note more indirect information relevant to our study. In the aftermath of Solomon's death and the breakup of his kingdom, we are told that Shishak of Egypt, or Pharaoh Shoshenq I as he is known from the Egyptian records, campaigned in Judah, and according to 2 Chronicles 12, verse 4, he took the fortified cities of Judah. While Gezer is not mentioned specifically here, the site's geographical position along the Via Maris, where it stands guard over the Ayalon Valley route up to Jerusalem, together with the city's status under King Solomon, strongly suggests Gezer's inclusion in the fortified cities that would have been targeted in such a campaign. Shoshenq's list of conquered cities at Karnak was argued by Mazar and Aharoni to include a reconstructed reference to Gezer. Kenneth Kitchen, however, dismissed this possibility outright, basing his reading of the name in question on the superior photographs and drawings of the original inscription produced by the Epigraphic Survey of the Oriental Institute. Anson Rainey, who based his arguments on his personal inspection of the original inscription, rejected Kitchen's proposed reading, but did not accept Gezer as a possible reading either. Thus, whether or not the damaged Karnak inscription originally included a reference to Gezer is uncertain. However, also missing from the inscription is a reference to Jerusalem, which features prominently in the biblical depiction